Welcome to our deep dive into the root causes of global uncertainty. Now, you might be thinking global uncertainty, that's a bit broad, isn't it? And you wouldn't be wrong. But here's the thing, beneath the chaos, there are underlying currents, systemic issues that keep us teetering on the precipice of, well, something not great. Today we'll explore that complex web of factors that threaten human society because, let's be honest, pretending everything is fine, that ship has sailed, my friends. All right, let's kick things off with a dose of reality. Humans are animals. We like to think we're above all that base instinct stuff, what with our fancy iPhones and ability to order pizza with our voices. But scratch beneath the surface and you'll find the same old drives for survival, resources, and yes, dominance. Take international conflicts, for example, wars over oil, natural gas, control of shipping lanes. It's all disturbingly familiar. Countries become like baboons in a particularly tense troop, vying for position, flashing their military might, and occasionally throwing metaphorical feces at each other. The question is, can we leverage those better angels of our nature before the more primal ones drag us all down?
Let's talk about accountability, or rather, the distinct lack thereof. Because in a world where corporations can pollute the planet with impunity, and dictators can commit human rights abuses without facing any real consequences, is it any wonder that global uncertainty is thriving? Think about it. Oil companies spill millions of gallons of crude into the ocean, devastating ecosystems and livelihoods. What happens? A slap on the wrist, a fine that's a drop in the bucket compared to their profits, and a promise to do better next time. Spoiler alert, they rarely do. Meanwhile, authoritarian leaders imprison dissidents, silence journalists, and rig elections, all while maintaining a firm grip on power. This lack of accountability creates a breeding ground for cynicism and distrust.
Now let's zoom in on a specific manifestation of this accountability crisis, the lack of effective law enforcement in many parts of the world. Because when corruption festers, it's like pouring Miracle Grow on global uncertainty. Imagine a country where the police are on the take, judges can be bought, and government officials treat public office like a personal piggy bank. Sounds like a dystopian novel, right? Well, for millions of people, this is the reality. In these environments, criminal enterprises flourish. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, arms smuggling, you name it, it thrives in the shadows, where the rule of law is about as substantial as a ghost's shadow. These illicit networks are global, their tentacles reaching across borders, fueling instability, violence, and yes, uncertainty. So what's the solution? Well, it's complicated.
Chapter 4. The Smoke-Filled Backroom, where transparency goes to die. Speaking of things that are about as transparent as a brick wall, let's talk about how a lack of open and accountable governance fuels global uncertainty. Because when decisions are made behind closed doors, with little to no input from the public or any real oversight, well, let's just say it's not exactly a recipe for trust and stability. This lack of transparency manifests in various ways. In some countries, it's blatant. Authoritarian regimes operating with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, where policies are dictated from on high, dissent is crushed, and the media is nothing more than a mouthpiece for the ruling elite. But it's not just about dictatorships. In democracies, too, we see a creeping erosion of transparency. The point is, when we don't know how decisions are being made or who they benefit, it breeds suspicion, distrust, and a sense that we're not in control of our own destiny.
Chapter 5. The resource rape, greed, exploitation, and global instability. Let's be honest, shall we? One of the most significant drivers of global uncertainty is a tale as old as time. Greed. The insatiable hunger for resources, for profit, for power, has a nasty habit of trampling over things like human rights, environmental sustainability, and you guessed it, global stability. Look no further than the exploitation of natural resources in many parts of the developing world. We're talking about countries rich in minerals, oil, diamonds, you name it, yet mired in poverty and conflict. Why? Because often, the profits from these resources are siphoned off by corrupt officials, multinational corporations, and let's be honest, all of us who benefit from cheap consumer goods. It's a vicious cycle.
Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the empire in the history books. Because the legacy of colonialism, of one group of people believing they're superior to another and therefore entitled to their land, resources, and even their lives, continues to cast a long shadow on global uncertainty. Think about it. European powers carved up Africa, Asia, and the Americas like a Thanksgiving turkey, driven by a toxic cocktail of greed, racism, and this delusion of bringing civilization to the uncivilized. The result? Centuries of exploitation, oppression, and violence that continue to resonate today. But colonialism isn't just a relic of the past. It's morphed, shape-shifted, into new forms of dominance.
Chapter 7. The Arrogance of Power. When Might Makes a Mess. Let's be honest, shall we? The United States, for all its talk about freedom, democracy, and apple pie, has a bit of a superpower complex. And as we all know, unchecked power, even with the best of intentions, can be a dangerous thing. Take the Iraq War, for example. A war launched on the shaky foundation of weapons of mass destruction that were never found. A war that destabilized an entire region, unleashed sectarian violence, and, let's be honest, made the world a whole lot less certain. And it's not just about military interventions.
Here's a fun thought experiment. Imagine a world where countries actually lived up to their lofty rhetoric about human rights, equality, and global solidarity. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Like a John Lennon song, but with less awkward nudity. Sadly, the reality is a bit more, shall we say, disappointing. Because while many Western nations love to tout their commitment to human rights, their actions often tell a different story. Take the refugee crisis, for example. Millions of people displaced by war, persecution, and climate change are met with closed borders, suspicion, and in some cases outright hostility. Where's the empathy, the compassion, the basic human decency? Or what about global poverty? We know how to eradicate it, yet billions of people still struggle to survive on less than $1 a day.
Let's talk about everyone's favorite recipe for global stability: the arms race. Because nothing says we're all going to be okay quite like stockpiling enough nuclear weapons to turn the planet into a smoldering cinder block. The US, Russia, China, they're like kids in a particularly tense game of who's got the bigger stick, except in this case, the stick can obliterate all life on Earth. Comforting, isn't it? And it's not just about nukes. We're talking about hypersonic missiles, killer drones, cyber weapons that can cripple infrastructure and sow chaos with the click of a button. But here's the kicker. This obsession with military might come at a cost. Resources that could be used to address pressing issues like climate change, poverty, and healthcare are instead funneled into the black hole of military spending.
So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of the root causes of global uncertainty. Feeling cheerful yet no? Well, join the club. We've talked about our primal instincts, the corrosive effects of greed and corruption, the arrogance of power, the empathy gap, and the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation. But here's the thing, despair is a luxury we can't afford, because as dire as the situation may seem, we still have a choice. We can continue down this path of self-destruction, or we can choose a different future. That means tackling these issues head-on, holding the powerful accountable, demanding transparency, fostering empathy, and, dare I say it, working together to address our shared challenges. It won't be easy. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of the root causes of global uncertainty. It wasn't pretty, was it? But sometimes facing the harsh realities is the first step towards changing them. Because here's the thing, the future isn't preordained. We collectively have the power to shape it, to steer ourselves towards a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. But it won't happen by itself, so let's get to work, shall we? Because the only thing more terrifying than the uncertainty we face is the certainty of what will happen if we do nothing at all.